We are talking Chargers. That's right, LA Chargers on Proline TV, part of the Ourlads Football Network. And we're trying to get in, and I promise you we will, all 32 teams before the draft. I'm trying to get this done before April. So we are more than halfway there. Talking LA Chargers this week, meaning Alex Insdorf is going to be here. As you can see him right there in the corner of the screen, a co-host of the Chargers Guilty as Charged podcast and Bolt Beat contributor for Fansided. How's it going, Alex?
Going good. Hectic time of year, but we're here for free agency and leading into the draft.
Hectic fun, right? It's
Yeah.
hectic fun for football fans. So we are talking about this Charger team that is fresh off of another playoff appearance, another disappointing playoff appearance. But as we've talked about the last couple of preseasons, there's still a long way to go with the talent on the roster. There are only 5 draft picks that they start with, so that is something they'll have to deal with. But they do have first, second, third, and fourth, so that's the most important. And maybe even more importantly, they have tons of cap space. And for a program like the Chargers, with a very good coaching staff, very nice environment, California, all that kind of stuff, beautiful stadium, you would think that they'd be able to get some things done. And that's, of course, what's going to kick things off in just a few weeks free agency. So we're going to go into all that. Let's first of all start off with the big acquisition, coaching acquisition, and Mike McDaniel. And would you say that the one part of the offense that will change the most because McDaniel is here is the offensive line?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest change in terms of going from Greg Roman, who was much more gap block type guys, right? Both in the draft and free agency. I think it's why Bradley Bozeman retired, but you had Mekhi Becton, who I think is very much not going to be a fit anymore, even with the season he had. I think it's just that itself. He's going to be gone when they cut him, but I think switching to a zone blocking scheme, you just need guys that are better movers, more athletic on the offensive line. So outside of Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt, they could be replacing all 3 spots on that interior offensive line.
And they probably would have been thinking about that anyway. It's just a different scheme. So, yeah. Because that's really, knowing Jim Harbaugh, I would think that if he does anything this offseason, he's going to fix that offensive line.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's the big thing that held them back, the last 2 years. I think once they got to the playoffs, obviously there's a lot of talking points about Justin Herbert, but Justin Herbert might not matter if you can't protect the quarterback, right? We just saw this with the Patriots, right, in the Super Bowl with Drake May. And so, I think it's for Harbaugh, who, is a trench guy. I think this is going to be a huge offseason for that, especially because of the amount of cap space they have.
What else? What other changes might we see with McDaniel running the show?
Yeah, I think with McDaniel running the show, offensive line's obviously the biggest one, like we just talked about. And then I think you just try to find out who's kind of going to fit in and fit out free agency wise, right? They
Sorry about that. I
Oh, was that on my end or your end? I didn't.
I was on my end,
Oh,
and
okay.
that wasn't even on my end. That was on
Oh,
StreamYard.
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause everything else was working fine, but
Yeah.
I'm assuming you kept talking.
Well, I kind of stopped when you got out of there, so that I was like a little confused. We were just talking about other changes, right? Other changes in the offense.
Yes.
I think they'll have to decide kind of what weapons, they want in this offense too, right? Like Keenan Allen, right, is coming off of a pretty good year, but he's getting older. Does he fit the scheme? Does Mike McDaniel want more speed in the draft, or via free agency? Um, the Tyreek Hill question will kind of like exist. If he's able to play, there's obviously some kind of connection there. But I think, this offensive roster as a whole, probably not a ton of change in the weapons, but I do think you're trying to find out, just which kind of guys can sort of fit in the scheme athletically versus which ones, they're going to move on from.
All right. Well, of course, we'll find those changes out real shortly on offense, and we'll do the same on defense because we're going to be going through the free agency aspect of the Chargers first. So let's tell you what. Before we get into the free agents, you mentioned Becton. Is he the only player that really just sticks out regarding? Okay, it's obvious he's going to get cut. They're going to save close to $10 million. Is that it? Is there anyone else?
I think Bud Dupree at edge is another possible cut candidate, just because he went down in his usage last year. Only played 20 snaps, I think, 1 week. At the end of the season, when they were resting Khalil Mack and Tuli Tuipulotu. So, assuming that you do bring back Odafe Owe, Khalil Mack, I kind of think Bud Dupree would be on the way out in that scenario. And then I think the other cut is possibly Will Dissly in the tight end room, whose usage also went down throughout the year as Rondé Gadsden emerged, but the Chargers kind of stopped using him as a blocker, and he really only got playing time when Tucker Fisk got hurt at tight end. So I think those are the other two possible cuts now that Bozeman's retired. Becton is cut, going to be cut, I should say. I think Will Dissly at tight end and then Bud Dupree at edge are probably the other two to watch.
Yeah, let's see. So Will is, where is he? He looks.
So with Will, they save about $4 million with a cut.
Yep.
And then with Bud Dupree, it's about 3.49 million.
Okay.
So that's another way that you can open up basically another $8 million on top of Becton, which is 12. So at that point, you're talking about well over $100 million in cap space for the Chargers. So I think those are kind of the three players to watch now that Bozeman has retired.
Yeah, and that's another big story that just happened recently, and it wasn't like he was having a great go at it anyhow.
Yeah.
So once again, it's almost like, all right, McDaniel coming in, that's going to change things in the offensive line. Well, they're going to change anyway. Bozeman retires. Well, who knows what'll happen there anyway. So I don't think this surprises many Chargers fans of what's going on there. But yeah, when you get over 100 million, you're going to be able to spend some money. So when you take a look around free agency, give me a position, because again, we all know that if you're a good tackle, you're not going anywhere in free agency, but the Chargers don't need good tackles. They need good interior linemen. So are there any specific interior linemen that you think that they should be targeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one everyone's going to talk about is Tyler Linderbaum from the Ravens, who has not agreed to a contract extension there and could very well possibly hit free agency. He was drafted by Chargers GM Joe Ortiz, right? So there is a connection there. Obviously, he's going to be, the highest paid center in free agency, which the Chargers, the Raiders, the Ravens, if they want to, right? Like, there's a bunch of teams that can open up cap space and get that done. So I would say that is one to watch. And then I think you want to kind of monitor, obviously, what's going on with Zion Johnson, the Chargers' own internal free agent at left guard. We kind of didn't talk about him, but there was an athletic article today saying he could get, up to 20 million potentially in free agency.
Really?
His market, and the guard market has kind of exploded.
Wow.
So the Chargers could decide to keep him at guard, but I kind of think at that point you're letting him walk and then going into some other guard options. And then at that point, Isaac Seumalo from the Steelers is one that kind of like strikes me as a potential candidate if he want to leave Pittsburgh. Lloyd Cushenberry up there is another like center candidate if they miss out on Linderbaum. I think Connor McGovern will be one to watch at center too. But I think they're basically kind of bookmarking, whoever kind of they get in the musical chairs game at probably at the very least one center, one left guard, from a big spending standpoint, and then also filling in the depth around them in the draft, the rest of free agency and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so does because taking a look at the rest of the free agents on the Chargers right now along the offensive line, so out of the let's see, what are there 3, 4, 5, 6 linemen, including Deculus, who's a restricted free agent. That's 7. So who do you think out of that group comes back?
Hard to. I think maybe with Jamari Salyer, there's some consideration towards bringing him back as like your backup swing tackle, but kind of depends on how much they want to pay there. He obviously did a really good job filling in for Joe Alt this year at left tackle. So, and he's filled in for Rashawn Slater back in 2022 as well. So I think if there's any consideration towards bringing in one of those backup linemen back, it is probably Jamari Salyer. Deculus would be cheap too if they want to keep him around his depth. But I think you probably want to, at the very least, re-sign 1 or 2 of those guys, so you're not completely rebuilding, the backup line. But then also, I expect them to probably take multiple linemen in the draft, obviously as a way of kind of building out their depth there, and that's the one position, center and guard in the draft, that I think they've kind of neglected the last 2 years, and it is sort of a eat vegetables year in free agency and the draft to a degree in terms of getting not just your starting linemen who we've talked about, but also as many backups as possible too, because as we saw this year, they were very much tested on the depth once their top line guys got injured.
So you would expect that again, you mentioned Johnson, and it doesn't really, even though they have the money, it doesn't really make sense. It's like the whole eye of the beholder deal.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of teams that want to pay him, like you said, because everybody's desperate for good line play. But boy, that just sounds like a contract that the Chargers are definitely going to pass on. So that means we would expect 3 new starting offensive linemen coming up, and then probably another, like you said, whether one of those starters winds up being a rookie or not, at least a couple of more from the rookie class. So maybe 5 new offensive linemen on the team minimum.
Yeah, I think you're probably looking at the very least 4 or 5.
Okay. All right. And let's see. Before we also tackle some other spots here, because you talked about Allen. And at this stage of his career, he's a 1-year kind of deal guy. So with them, they have the money. Is he just a definite, as long as he wants to play, he's back?
It was kind of interesting because I think he would want to be back, but obviously with the offensive coordinator change, right? Like you don't know what direction they're kind of going to go in there. Mike McDaniel has traditionally liked faster guys, but like I think there is a role for Keenan Allen if he's willing to take, obviously, the lesser role to some extent that he's taken, that he took last year. He was on like a $3 million deal last year. So money is not, I think, the problem, kind of like you indicated. I think it's just more about, do they view him as a fit for this offense when you're also trying to get Ladd McConkey targets, you're trying to get Trey Harris targets, who they drafted last year. Do you want those going to 34-year-old Keenan Allen instead? Like, I think that is kind of the line that they have to walk in this free agency is getting as many targets and usage out of your young guys while also sort of maintaining your relationship with Keenan or whatever other veteran wide receiver you might bring in free agency. So I think that's kind of going to be an interesting balance to watch, even though it's obviously not as big as the offensive line situation.
Yeah, you would think it's maybe one of those deals that doesn't get done very quickly. Wait and see kind of approach, unless they know for sure exactly what direction you want to go. And does Lambert Smith fit into the occasion as well? It's another draft pick. I know it was a McDaniel pick, but it was a Harbaugh pick. And did he show enough that that's just another young receiver that needs to be able to get some opportunity?
Yeah, I think he showed enough flashes towards the end of last year specifically. I think at the beginning of the year, he was a 5th round pick, so it was a little rocky at the beginning in terms of just like him, getting used to the NFL, lining up in the right spot. I think as a kick returner, as a receiver, towards the end of the year, he definitely got a little bit more comfortable. So yeah, like I said, I think with Keenan, they signed him last August, I want to say, something around that time, right, when Mike Williams got hurt in training camp. And Keenan's not looking to go anywhere, right? He's looking to stay with Chargers, which is what he said during Super Bowl week, right? And he's at the age of his career where, like you mentioned, it's year by year kind of at this point, as opposed to like a big contract or something like that. So I think it's just figuring out, A, how much longer does he want to play, and then B, when is the right time to kind of talk contract Chargers, because I think he also knows, the team's going to be dealing with their top free agent priorities, at the beginning of this period.
What does the team feel about Quentin Johnson, his development, as well as how Trey Harris looked as a rookie?
Yeah, I think QJ has definitely developed over the last 3 years. I think the big thing will be he has a 5th-year option in a decision in May to see if he'll remain under contract for 2027. That I think will be an interesting decision because I think the 5th-year option for him is about $17 million. So that is a big number. QJ, I think, has progressed, especially from where he was his rookie year. But they turned down the 5th-year option on Zion Johnson last year, kind of in a similar fashion. So this Joe Ortiz Harbaugh regime has not picked up a 5th-year option yet, I believe. So we'll kind of see how that pans out and how that unfolds. But I think with QJ, it's interesting because I do think that's the one where if you have 1 year left on his contract and you turn down the 5th-year option, does that turn into like trade conversations, stuff like that? By the time of the draft, if he ends up being an expiring contract. So I think he'll be back, but I'm curious to see if they ever, think about, especially like you mentioned, they only have 5 or 6 picks this year. Do they want to get an extra pick, right? If they're, moving on from a player that's not going to be part of the long term. So I'll be curious to see what they do with Quentin Johnson's 5th-year option in May this year, and then how they approach it from there.
And of course, the guys that you mentioned were not part of this regime. So maybe not a surprise that these 5th-year options not being picked up. And Trey Harris, did he have a successful rookie season for a second rounder?
Yeah, I mean, probably not what the fantasy community would say. But I think from fitting in with the Chargers, he definitely came along towards the end of last year as well. Had some big catches, big moments for the team, like that Kansas City game. So I think they've seen, enough development moving forward to him having a bigger year in year 2. I think it's also a similar question. Ladd McConkey is obviously more developed, but I think it's a similar question of like, how many targets do you want going to Keenan? How many do you want going to the young guys, right, who are kind of ascending? So that's kind of a, question that Mike Daniel and the Chargers obviously will have to answer.
And then Najee Harris was pretty much a no-show because of the injury. So has there been any news at all on whether the Chargers feel like bringing him back?
Not really news. I know his agent put out that, he's seemingly healthy and working out, currently as he's rehabbing from the torn Achilles. So I think, to me, the Chargers ultimately move on there. You have Hampton, who's under contract, obviously, as a first-round pick. And you had Kamani Vidal, who broke out last year after, Najee got injured. He got that opportunity. They basically have Kamani's exclusive rights free agency. So he's, if he doesn't sign a new contract by March 11th, I think they basically have him for like a $1 million cap hit this year before he can then enter unrestricted free agency, I think, the next year. So to me, I think Hampton and Vidal are your 1-2. And then, if Najee wants to come back, maybe like they kind of entertain that discussion. But I tend to think for your RB3, that'll be more the draft, or like you could sign maybe a special teams kind of running back. Raheem Mostert obviously played special teams for the Raiders this year, has previous connections with Mike McDaniel in San Francisco and Miami. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was like kind of an RB3 candidate. And then, I think there's a bunch of guys in the draft, obviously, you could take on maybe day 3 just to build out your running back depth. Or Kene Nwangwu from the Jets is a really good returner who has experience with Chargers special teams coordinator Ryan Ficken. So that would be another name I'd kind of bookmark. But I think in general, Hampton, Vidal are your 1-2, and then you bring in another, running back at some point to kind of bolster the room and bolster the depth. But I do think they ultimately move on from Najee.
And more than likely, we're talking like a free agent. They're not going to spend one of their little remaining draft picks on a running back, no matter how late.
Yeah, I will say they do. I think they actually do have 6 picks now, because it says 5, but they did get a comp pick, I believe, from J.K. Dobbins. So I think they have an extra 6th-round pick now, for what it's worth. That as Kahan says in the chat, they do have 2 6th-round picks as a result of Dobbins.
Okay.
So I believe that's pick 214.
Okay, so 6 total, 2 in the 6th, and it's still early. Okay, so who has the best chance? Is it Fisk because he's a restricted guy? Who has the best chance because you're thinking Disley might get cut. So who has the best chance of returning at tight end besides Gadsden?
I think it's kind of wide open. I don't think Conklin will be back. That experiment was unsuccessful. I think Disley is ultimately, and then I think it's about figuring out where Tucker Fisk and Scott Matlock at fullback fit into the equation. Does Mike McDaniel want them for a completely different kind of blocking scheme? Does he want to bring in his own guys? Obviously, Darren Waller is a guy that exists in free agency, and him and Mike McDaniel have talked very highly of each other. So that's like potential connection, but there's plenty of tight end depth in the draft as well. So I really think it's kind of a clean slate behind Ourlads Gadsden, and they try to rebuild the tight end room, get some pass catchers in there, but also get in get some blockers in there. Charlie Kolar is another name I would watch from Baltimore, who is kind of your prototypical blocking tight end that Ortiz also drafted when he was there. So I'd be curious if they moved on him in free agency. But I think other than Ourlads Gadsden, I do think it is potentially a clean slate in the running back room, in the tight end room. Maybe they bring Fisk back, but I think that's kind of it.
Yeah, I was talking to Tony Lombardi with the Ravens. Very high on Kolar. As a player that needs to get more reps somewhere else, if not, because the Ravens have a tough decision to make themselves. It's likely or Kolar, and Tony actually believes if there's a decision there, it's going to be Kolar, which might be surprising to some fans, but that just shows you that he's a nice young tight end that people need to keep an eye on. So it's good that you mentioned.
I think that makes sense too. They paid Mark Andrews, so it's like you're probably not bringing Mark Andrews and likely back at that price, and then Kolar is obviously, a quality blocking tight end that you could probably have for cheaper than likely, relatively speaking. So I think that makes sense.
Okay, defensively, a lot of questions here as well. The big one is Adafe Owe And it's very rare that you see a player get traded at the deadline, a player who has not developed yet, and all of a sudden just breaks out with another organization to the point where he could have been like a $2 or $3 million player, and then all of a sudden he's now maybe one of the top edge rushers candidates in free agency because of his youth. And the Chargers have the money, so I can't imagine they're going to let him go.
Yeah, I think they try to retain Odafe as their top priority in this free agency over Zion. Khalil Mack is kind of in his own box because, you'll see if he ultimately wants to come back, if he wants to retire, right? So there's a lot of options for him. But to me, Odafe, 7.5 sacks after he was traded, 3 more sacks in that playoff game against the Patriots. I think something like 50 pressures, something like that. He went on an insane run, and he ultimately has a speed skill set that I think really none of the other Chargers edge rushers really have. So I think obviously there's a point where the money could get crazy and they don't want to pay it. I would get that, but I think ultimately they try their hardest to retain him out of all of the free agents.
Yeah, it would have to take a team to just be ridiculous. Which I don't know if they're going to go too crazy because, again, it's just a small sample size.
Right.
So, and so Mack is basically retire or comes back to the Chargers.
Yeah, or I mean, I would throw the Ravens in there too, who
really
could be interested in Mack, right?
That's true, I guess.
Jesse Minter just left there, right? Yeah. I don't think Khalil really wants to leave LA. He likes LA. His kids and his family like LA. But if there was a chance where he felt like, hey, Baltimore is a better chance at getting to a ring, maybe I would mention that one. But I do ultimately kind of think it's Chargers or retire.
And they got more money anyway, so.
Yeah, that's
Chargers won't be over. They won't. There's no way the Ravens will be able to overspend the Chargers for Khalil Mack. So okay. And how about St. Juste? Here's another player who really was trying to find himself early in his career. Nothing was working. Goes to the Chargers, and I know it wasn't a full-time kind of gig, but it was enough that he's still talking a 29-year-old player. But is this would he be the priority DB, or would it be Jefferson because the veteran leadership and he's still playing at a decent level?
I think between those two, probably Tony, just because I think I don't know if either of them are going to be particularly expensive to keep, but Tony played really well last year, and I think is a pretty pivotal part to that safety rotation where you have Derwin, him, Elijah Molden, RJ Mickens, who they just drafted. So I think they'd like to keep him if possible, but it's weird to say because Tony Jefferson retired and he was done with football, and now he's he has free agency interest, right? So it's
money.
Yeah, so I think he ultimately finds a way to stay. I think St. Juste is the more interesting one, just because he did bounce back from his Washington, seasons before. I think he's a guy that, can he get a better role with another team, whether that's a CB2, CB3, instead of being a rotational CB4, so if there's a team that has money on the table for him or a better role for him, I'm curious what the Chargers would do, but he's a player I'd like to, have back as well if it's possible.
Okay, and then the rest of the defense, Perryman is getting up there in age, primarily more just a run defender. That's what he is. You think, does he come back?
I think they'd probably like to get younger, but Denzel, kind of like Keenan, right, has been with the organization for a long time, so it would stun me if he was back. But I do think the priority there, with the amount of injuries Denzel's had too, I kind of wonder if they want to move on and get younger there. But, he's still a very good run defender, I think, when he is healthy. But probably not one of their top priorities, obviously with, starting free agency, kind of like Keenan. I think they can wait on that a little bit to like the second, third week of free agency and kind of deal with that. But
okay. And no big deal if they lose like Bonia or Hand.
I think they'd like to keep Hand. Ogbonia, I think, is probably gone, but obviously, kind of like with the Puna Ford conversation last year, right? Like there will be a number they're willing to pay, and if it's over that, they did just extend Tier Tart, who was projected to be free agent, but now is locked in for 3 more years. So you probably don't want to spend crazy on the interior defensive line, and I think they're going to invest one of their top 3 draft picks into it as well. I do think with this defensive line class, they are going to get another guy. Caleb Banks is obviously potentially there in the first round as a guy they might be interested in. But I do think they're going to invest another draft pick. So I don't know. Depends on what Hand's value is, but he did play well this year when he was out there.
Okay, now on the defensive side, because I don't really see a whole lot of offensive guys, but correct me if I'm wrong. But what I'm getting at is, are there any players on defense or offense who young players, doesn't necessarily have to be of the rookie class last year, but young players who are expected, they're anticipating will take a bigger step this year. And so, if fans are looking at depth charts and they're trying to figure out things, don't forget about these guys, these young guys. Who would those be, if anybody?
I think Kyle Kennard, who they drafted in the 4th round last year, largely was kind of a healthy-ish, scratch. Kind of a redshirt year for him. He got a little active when they had, clinched and locked up spots, and they had some injuries. So then he got some playing time, but he was not active for that New England game. I think ideally they'd like to see some development from him, right? Given the pick that they spent, and maybe Bud Dupree's out of there, so he has a little bit of an uptick in role. So I think Kyle Kennard is probably the guy that you're, talking about potentially more on defense next year. RJ Mickens, right, who I think played really well when he was out there. Marlo Wax, I think, is a name to watch at linebacker. Was a really good undrafted free agent find for them. And then the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season, he played really, really well, especially in their last game against Denver. So I think he's kind of a shoe-in for a potentially bigger role, maybe linebacker 2, linebacker 3, behind Dayon next year. But depends on which guys they bring back. But I definitely think out of those names, you're talking about Wax, Kennard, and Mickens kind of taking more steps forward next year.
Okay. Nobody on offense?
Offensively, I think you'd like to see obviously more of Trey Harris, who I think is going to get more into the mix. Keandre Lambert-Smith, like we mentioned. Outside
not
of
many
that,
other options.
Yeah, or I mean, like around. Yeah, I would say like Gadsden next year, but he's already tight end 1, so it's like
Okay, well, let's get into the big question here, and that is off-season needs. We've kind of already figured some of this out already. So I guess 1 and 2, would it be fair to say 1 and 2 is like center/guard?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair to say for anyone who's had a pulse or anyone who watched the games. I think that's 1 and 2. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the easy ones. So let's get to some of the others. What would be the top non-offensive line need for the Chargers?
I think I would say edge, just because we don't know about Odafe Owe and Khalil Mack. They might be back, might be not.
Does it depend on them both not signing or one or the other? If they both come back, does that not then become really a need at all?
I think if they're both back, it's not that much of a need, maybe except like 1 pick in the draft or something. But if they both walk, that creates a huge hole for the Chargers. If one of them walks, right, like if someone overpays for Odafe Owe and you bring Khalil Mack back, you kind of go into the year knowing you're probably having Khalil Mack for 1 more year, and then you do still have to find, another player to replace Adafe's production, right? So that would be the one that I think is tricky to figure out. So I would put edge third just because Adafe, Owe, and Mac are unsigned at the moment.
Okay. What's next?
I'll say.
By the way, are they happy with Jamari Caldwell? There's another rookie we didn't talk about.
I think Jamari played pretty well last. I think they expect a little bit more pass rushing production potentially out of him next year, especially. So I think they're set. They're set with him and Taylor, both as like I think your primary nose tackle, just middle of your defense, going to stop the run kind of options.
Okay.
I think they would like to. I'm going to put DT at 4 just because like I think there are a bunch of good defensive tackles in the draft. And I think if you fall into one of those guys, right, whether it's first, second, third round, I think they could try to find, pass rushing option. Caleb Banks, I think, has been, the talk of a lot of Chargers fans. More nose tackle types in this draft in general, but I think if you can find some pass rushing value there, or even an edge player who can kick inside, right? Left kind of Keldrick Faulk type a little bit. Those are, I think you're trying to look for some defensive pass rush pressure, but ultimately, I think R. Mason Thomas there from Oklahoma is a guy that I would maybe watch for them, like if they were to replace Adafe Owe, because he does kind of a lot of the same speed rushing stuff. So I would be curious in him if they did let Adafe Owe walk. But
let's see. We did our first mock draft a few weeks ago, and I just again, no surprise who we picked an alignment. You think the Chargers would be really happy with this pick? I think they would.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, if Iona's there, I think you run the pick in and don't
yeah, exactly.
I think the interesting question is if Iona's off the board, and then you're left with the Eagles who took Sadiq there, right? You're left with Caden Proctor, who's a tackle/guard option. You're left with potentially a situation where if Iona's off the board, like that is the one person who fits their offensive line need in the first round.
Yeah.
Then do you want to trade down? Do you want to
get some more picks?
Yeah, maybe get some more picks, or do you go for a defensive line presence, kind of like Banks, like I mentioned earlier, who I assume is somewhere around this range.
Sure.
So, or you could go corner, right? So you could go for like any of the standout like defensive options too. Chase Basantis is probably somewhere in that range. So I think if Ione's off the board, run the pick in, or if he's on the board, run the pick in. But I think the more interesting question is if he's not there, what do you do? And, we saw this with the Chargers last year when they clearly wanted Derek Harmon. Derek Harmon goes off the board to Pittsburgh. So then they take Omarion Hampton, right? So, when you're the 22nd pick, you don't quite have you don't know the board in front of you like in 2024 when they knew Joe Alt would be available, right?
Yeah.
So when he was like a top 5 pick. So when you're at 22, it's more we'll see how the board kind of comes to us.
Especially when you're not going to be trading up and giving up draft capital, you're going to be doing the opposite. Yeah. So. Okay, so that's give me one last need for the Chargers. By the way, how's the special teams looking? Because it seems like it's in decent shape, but you tell me.
Yeah, I think they could look for a replacement at returner. Darius Davis, okay. He's been injured the last 2 years. Not necessarily like a replacement in free agency, but probably somebody that is like a competition, like in camp kind of a thing. J.K. Scott at punter is an interesting conversation. Kind of, they're not going to cut him in March because you want to have a punter, but like, do they get maybe a Jack Stonehouse from Syracuse, right? Somebody in the draft, as an undrafted free agent or like a very, very late round pick, for like punting competition, or do you sign, another punter in free agency to kind of push in competition too? So I think that's kind of an interesting line for them. But he did have two. Scott had two pretty bad games against New England, and Houston was kind of average for most of the season. But then those games, I think, really kind of tanked his stock in the eyes of a lot of fans. And we'll see what the coaching staff feels about him heading into this year.
Okay, so let's go back to that final pick. I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Secondary, anything there?
I think out of these, I'd probably say the fifth is tight end.
Okay.
Just because I think you're kind of blowing up the room behind Gadsden, and so if you are replacing all those guys, you do need to find a blocking tight end, like we mentioned with Kolar potentially in free agency, or find a tight end in the draft, right? Or maybe Sadiq is an option in like the first round if like Ione's off the board, right? So a lot of ways they could go about like filling the tight end room in general, but I would put that as the fifth need just because they have no one really behind Gadsden right now that's like locked into a role.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Sadiq, wow. I mean, then they would definitely not bring Keenan Allen back. There would be too many mouths to feed.
Yeah. Would be interesting.
Yeah, but hey, it's Harbaugh. He loves his ends, so anything is possible. Okay, so there you go. Offensive line edge is a possibility. We'll look at free agency, of course, first, defensive tackle, and a blocking tight end. Keep an eye on special teams, some competition for returners, and the punting game. You mentioned Linderbaum at center. Would he be because the team has enough cap space where they can go out and they can get a couple of blockbuster guys? So is he like at the top of if all Charger fans and Chargers in general, if they had a wish list of one premier free agent, he would be it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
For all the reasons we discussed, but I think especially in this scheme, having somebody like him that you just sign a guy and you don't even have to really think about what you're going to do at center, and you already have two all-pro caliber tackles, right, with Slater and Alt. I think just makes the rest of the offseason a lot less complicated if you are able to fill that spot early in free agency.
And would he be it? Would there be anybody else? Have you even thought about any other potential big name free agents that the Chargers might zero in on?
Yeah, there was Cushenberry who just got cut from Tennessee.
You mentioned him. Okay.
And then the other one I would mention is Connor McGovern from Buffalo, who also is a free agent. So those are kind of like if you miss out on Linderbaum options, but
it's got to be center then. Yeah, that's where they're going to spend their most money is getting one of those top couple of guys.
And I also don't think there's really anyone in the draft who you can just draft at center and like start day one in the same way we were talking about like Ione, right? Ione is a day one plug and play guy. I don't really think that guy exists at center in this class, which is why you have to go out and spend some money for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, that means because look, we would expect that to happen, which means that once you look into the draft, those first two picks could still be guard. So, but we'll see. Again, it all depends on which center they get because Linderbaum, I don't know how old he is. I know he was 27, 28, something like that.
Yeah.
But it all depends on what Cushenberry and who was the other one? McGovern.
Yeah, McGovern.
They're both about 29, 30. They're a couple of years older than
sort of like backup Linderbaum options. Tyler Biotish is going to be like available. So that's like, kind of getting into if you lose out like a couple of these guys, but I ultimately think they're going to make a pretty strong pitch for at least one of these kind of premier center free agents because they need it.
Makes a lot of sense. So we'll definitely be checking everything out for the Chargers with the links in the description of this video where you can follow Alex's work. Again, over at Bolt Beat from Fansided. So again, check the links and look out for his weekly show, which when's your next show, by the way?
Sometime next week, we'll be talking about all the stuff that goes or is about to go down in free agency. So stay tuned for the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel.
Sort of post combine, pre free agency show.
Yeah.
Those are always good. We got to do one of those too with Ourlads. I think we got to do another mock draft after the combine. So, Alex, I appreciate your time. I know you're busy with the site, the podcast, and you're still in school. So bless you.
Thank you.
And you're still, of course, even in a nice location too, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Party on. Thanks a lot, Alex. I appreciate it. Keep up the great work and look forward to seeing you again right after the draft.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. You got it, Alex. Again, Alex Insdorf. Want to check him out. Does a really good job with the Chargers. And this is a really big offseason, obviously, for LA with all that cap space. And they're going to be opening up some more. So we'll see exactly if they can get in on and secure the Tyler Linderbaum situation there, because that would be a big one if they could do that. That is going to wrap it up for our football coverage this week. We are back next week with more, including our Cleveland Brown offseason interview with Fred Greetham. We've got Mark Carman coming up with the Chicago Bears. Those are just a couple that we have lined up real soon, and then we've got a bunch more for the rest of March. I'll see you later tonight at 8 o'clock for our college basketball coverage right here on Proline TV. And again, stay tuned for hopefully a mock draft special over at Ourlads, and that should be coming out real soon as well. So for Alex Insdorf, I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in here, and we'll see you again next time.